Welcome to the Missouri Farm Bureau's 2024 Gubernatorial Candidate Forum, presented by Missouri Farm Bureau and Brownfield Ag News. We'll hear from Democratic candidate Crystal Quaid, Republican candidates Jay Ashcroft, Bill Eigel, and Mike Kehoe. Brownfield's Carah Hart will moderate the discussion. To kick off the forum, here's Garrett Hawkins, the president of Missouri Farm Bureau.
So welcome officially to the 2024 Gubernatorial Forum. This builds on Missouri Farm Bureau's forum in 2015, and we could not be more excited to have Missouri's leading candidates for governor with us this afternoon. You know, I want to be clear up front that this isn't a sponsored event of Missouri Farm Bureau's political action committees. This is Missouri Farm Bureau Federation. And the work of our political action committees will happen in the weeks and months to come. And I know many of our trustees are in this room. But truly, this is a wonderful opportunity at our 109th annual meeting to truly be together and hear and talk about the issues. So this year, a little different than 2015, we're actually partnering with our friends at Brownfield Ag News. And we could not be more excited about that, to have Cindy Young as well as Carah Hart, who are with us today. So up front, I'm going to let you all know that the four candidates that you're going to hear from, the order of appearance as chosen randomly by Brownfield. Senator Bill Eigel will be first, followed by Representative Crystal Quaid, then following Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, and then rounding out the four will be Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. So Brownfield Ag News will be posing the questions to the candidates. We, as in Missouri Farm Bureau, haven't selected the questions. That was left to Cindy and Carah and their team. Each candidate will have about 15 minutes on stage, and I'm looking forward to, just like all of you, this informative hour. So with that, I will turn it over to the director of Brownfield Ag News, Miss Cindy Young, who, I should add, will be receiving the Outstanding Service to Agriculture Award tomorrow morning as a part of our general session. So let's give her a big, warm Farm Bureau welcome.
Thank you very much, President Hawkins. We are excited to be here. On behalf of Brownfield Ag News, thank you very much to Missouri Farm Bureau for the opportunity to partner with this unique and important program. I want to begin by introducing Carah Hart, who is the anchor reporter for Brownfield Ag News based in Missouri. And I'm sure many of you have seen her around the convention and other activities across the state covering agriculture. So thank you very much to Carah for taking the bull by the horns. She has really taken a lot of the responsibility of putting the questions together, and very proud of the work that she does. I will be introducing each of the candidates by name, not by title, and we are very much looking forward to having 13 to 14 minutes with each of the candidates, and we will begin now. Carah, if you are ready.
I'm ready, Cindy. Thank you.
Okay, I will begin by introducing, again by name, not by title. Bill Eigel is the Republican candidate for Missouri governor, who will join us first.
Thanks so much for joining us, State Senator Eigel.
Hey, happy to be here.
Time starts now.
Oh,
all right. So let's go ahead and, I guess, dive into
This is
some
different
questions.
than the Missouri Senate for sure.
I know, right? What should be done to continue to drive growth in Missouri's top industry, agriculture?
Great question. So first of all, I think I want to throw out there that a lot of the same things that I've been proposing that are going to be good for agriculture are good for everybody in the state. One of the things I've been talking about, I just filed legislation on this week, is eliminating and reducing the tax burden that is stagnating all of Missouri, whether you're in our rural communities, whether you're in our suburbs or our cities. The tax burden has never been bigger in this state. And if you look at states are growing, that states that are growing and not named Missouri, it's because they're not doing some of the dumb things that we do in this state. Like, for example, charge you rent for the crime of owning a car, a tractor, or a combine. That's why I'm the only candidate that is proposing getting rid of that thing we call personal property tax. And personal property tax is one of the things that other big red states are not doing, and they're growing. Something else we need to get rid of is income tax. Income tax, punishing individuals for producing. Think about that. We're punishing individuals for producing is something we've got to get away from. States that are eliminating these bad versions of tax. And it's not a discussion about whether or not we want to fund local services. It's a conversation about whether or not the right way to do it is to charge people for the crime of voting property. My answer to that question is no. And I think if we can tackle those big issues, and we got plenty of Republicans down there in Jefferson City willing to do it, maybe not the right ones, but there are plenty of Republicans down there, I think Missouri is going to get growing, and that's going to be good for everybody in the state.
If you eliminate some of the taxes, where does other money come from to make up for what those taxes are currently paying for?
That's the number one question I get, right? How are you going to replace the money if we get rid of personal property? Listen, I want to be really out front with you. I'm not. Listen, I want everybody here to take away from this discussion that of all the problems that we have in this state right now, none of them have to do with government not getting enough of your cash. Not one of them. In fact, right now, the state of Missouri spends twice as much per person as the state of Florida. Twice as much. We have increased the state budget in Missouri by $27 billion since I've been a state senator in 2017. The value of every personal property tax on every citizen in every county is about $1.7 billion. So the problem is not that government's not getting enough from you. The problem is that we haven't had leadership in this state that instead of asking, how are we going to take care of government, the state leadership ought to be asking, how are we going to take care of Missouri taxpayers? And the fact that we haven't been answering that question is why all our communities are stagnating, and that's why growth is going to states not named Missouri. We've got to get rid of personal property tax. It's a great place to start.
I'm not sure if I got much clarity in that answer. Can you be a little bit clearer
Sure.
where some of that money's coming from?
Sure, I'll tell you, the surplus, the new revenue, just the new revenue in general revenue, in growth that we got in Jefferson City this year, just the growth, was $2 billion last year. $2 billion. Now, I told you that the value of every personal property tax bill was $1.7 billion, which means that right now, this week, we all go down on December 1st and start paying personal property tax. This week, we're all going to pay that bill. With just the growth in revenues that we got, general revenues at the state level, we could have gotten rid of the personal property tax bill of every person and every farmer in this state and still had $300 million left over. Did we do that? No, we didn't do that. How many of us here know what we wasted all that money on? $10 billion in new decision items. $10 billion. We got a meat lab making synthetic meat. We got tens of millions of dollars for professional private sports stadiums. And when we were wasting all that money in the form of $10 billion in new decision items, we weren't cutting your personal property tax. That's why guys like me and a lot of folks that I'm meeting around the state, especially in our rural areas, are furious. They feel disappointed, frustrated, angry that we haven't gone after these big red policy wins that they're seeing happen in other states.
Thank you. If elected governor, how would you address concerns about increased foreign ag land ownership in the state without taking away from the agricultural research focus that is so present here in the state of Missouri?
So it's a great question. Whenever I go to events where I have a lot of folks asking me questions, I always like to ask the audience, how many acres of Missouri farmland should we sell to any foreign country? Any foreign country. And the answer is always the same, 0. I hear that over and over. We shouldn't sell any of Missouri farmland to foreign entities. And of course we should. I mean, I'll give you an example. The country of China manipulates their currency. Then they use that manipulated currency to drive up the value of farmland in our state when they're going in the market over here, which puts Missouri farmland out of the hands of the people that we want to see it have it the most, other Missourians, or at least Americans. In fact, it's not just China that does this. The World Economic Forum is out there trying to get their hands and control of our food supply. That's why I've been an advocate of not only restricting the sale of Missouri farmland to any foreign entity or country, I've also filed a constitutional amendment this week that would require divestiture of the foreign land that's already owned by foreign entities here in the state of Missouri. We're going to take Missouri back. It's going to be owned by Missourians or at least Americans.
Missouri Farm Bureau is in the process of offering health plans to farmers. What's your stance on rural health care affordability and availability?
Yeah, healthcare for everybody is more expensive today. In fact, I first got involved in politics back in 2016 when we passed this thing called Obamacare. I mean, most of you probably remember those days, right? Obamacare, your rates were going to go down, you were going to keep your doctor, things were going to get more affordable. Well, guess what? None of that was true. And in spite of all the federal money and all the state money that's been pouring into our healthcare apparatus, outcomes and prices have gotten worse. And look at our biggest Medicaid, our biggest government program, it's Medicaid program here at the state level. Well, we spend billions of dollars on that Medicaid program every year, which was found to have more than $1 billion of waste in it. And in a third-party audit that we did in 2017 on that Medicaid program, you know how many reforms of that report have been implemented that found $1 billion of waste? None. So imagine the good that we could do for our communities. Imagine if we took billions of dollars in savings from inefficient, broken government, just like from our Medicaid program, and started rolling it into things like eliminating personal property tax. Imagine if we do that. That's the Missouri I'm talking about.
In the last year, we've seen 2 major food production companies close processing plants or shut down farms in Missouri, Smithfield and Tyson Foods. How does Missouri continue to attract new agricultural companies into the state and keep them?
Yeah, so this goes back to my first answer. There's a tendency to think that what's good for one part of the population somehow is not good for everybody else. I'm here to tell you guys, and you all know this, what's good for our agricultural communities is good for everybody in the state. And the same policies that we're not implementing statewide to benefit every one of the 6 million people here is stagnating our farming communities. A lot of the rural communities, almost all the rural communities in this state are stagnating, they're shrinking. And when they lose the talent and the individuals and the investment, that hurts us statewide. So what do we need to do to get them growing again? Well, I just told you, we got to reduce the tax burden. Like I said, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, who I consider models for how we want to do business in this state, they are growing because they don't charge you rent on your vehicle for personal property tax. They don't charge you income tax. And they've had folks that have not only just claimed to be fiscal conservatives in campaign season, but have actually done it once they got to their state capitals. And they reduced, imagine this, they reduced government spending. And when they did, they were able to set up an environment that prospered all the areas of the state. Imagine a Missouri where you're not paying rent on your combines and your tractors. That's the Missouri I'm talking about.
Rural roads and bridges. I hear from farmers that in many areas of the state, there are many in disrepair that need attention. Mm-hmm. What can the state be doing to better improve rural roads and bridges for so many of these farmers and ranchers that are present and those that aren't with us today?
Well, so I mentioned earlier that our state budget, by the way, our state budget has never been as big as it is right now. When I came in my first year in the Senate in 2017, the state budget was $27 billion. This year is $51 billion. $51 billion. We've doubled the size of government. We've doubled the size of government, and yet it's amazing that in spite of doubling the size of government, I hear that we still have roads and bridges that need to be addressed. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that's amazing if you think about it. That's a failure. That's a failure of the regimes that have been in charge of Jefferson City because they're not going around and addressing the actual needs of the communities and of the areas of this state. We need to make additional. I've always been a proponent of making additional investments. Now, unlike the Farm Bureau, I don't think that we should be raising people's taxes to do it. One of the worst things that we could do right now would be to raise the tax burden. I mean, I'm running in this primary against other individuals who passed and supported the largest tax increase in the history of this state. That's what not only divides the Republican Party, but it makes Missouri less attractive. Just because a tax is low, the gas tax is what I'm talking about, just because a tax is low is not a reason to raise it. And I got to tell you, we got plenty of money down there in Jefferson City, and when I see all the money that's been wasted on things that would make you pale if you knew all the things that we're wasting the money on instead of fixing those roads, you would realize, I think many of you already have realized, that we can do a lot better and spend that money far more efficiently than what we're doing right now.
I want to circle back to foreign ag land ownership. I've been reading where you plan to introduce new legislation to bring back up in the next session. Mm-hmm. Last year, state lawmakers couldn't find agreement on that issue. What's different this time around?
So I can tell you what's different in my legislation in particular is last year I was the only one to have a bill that would actually, and this was Senate Bill 9, the only individual in legislature that filed legislation that would have restricted foreign ownership for all types of land, agricultural, commercial, and residential. The constitutional amendment that I did file a couple days ago focuses on Missouri farmland, on agricultural land, and not only prohibits the sale of that land, but also has a divestment mechanism so that those that currently own, foreign entities that currently own Missouri farmland have to begin the process and ultimately transfer out of that ownership in the first 2 years. So that's kind of a difference in tone of before we were just restricting it. I think that we not only need to restrict it, which is good moving forward, but we've got to get the land that we've lost back. So that's the difference. From a political difference, I think it was actually a two-part question. That's the functional difference. From a political difference, you know, there's always been a coalition of, believe it or not, Republicans and Democrats that realize that it's a bad idea to sell control of your food supply to foreign entities. I think we had some political actors, though, that were stepping and standing in front of this bill. The Senate passed a bill that actually did restrict all ownership of foreign ground, and the Farm Bureau, I believe, supported that effort, if I'm not mistaken. And I think now that we have raised more attention to that issue during the off-season, and so I would be very surprised if those same political factors are finding a way to interfere with something that pretty much everybody in the state knows we need to do.
We're nearing the end of our time together. So in closing, what would be the one takeaway that you would want these Farm Bureau members to walk away with today?
So I'll give you kind of my top three of things that I'm going to focus on as the next governor of the state. One, property rights. I tell you what, we're not only going to protect property rights and farmers from foreign entities that are coming in and trying to take our ground. I've actually also filed legislation that's going to restrict the use of eminent domain that's trying to confiscate ground for the use of solar farms and windmill farms as well. So we're going to protect property rights. Two, we're going to make sure that we've reduced the tax burden so that all of our communities can thrive. I'm the only one advocating and with a plan to get rid of the personal property tax. And when we do that, we get rid of the income tax and cut the spending that's going to be required to do that, we're going to have a whole new place here in how we're leading these United States. And then finally, I want to free a lot of our farmers and work to reduce regulation and remove the barriers that are currently in between everyday smaller farmers and folks all over the state. You know, kind of the theme of, I think folks in this state, you should know your farmer and know your food. And I think that if we can get all the bureaucracies that are in the way of making those two very simple statements happen, Missouri's going to be a lot better for it. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Senator Eigel, for joining us today.
All right. I'm usually not on a time limit.
No, well, trying to keep it going here.
Ladies and gentlemen, candidate Bill Eigel. And we are on a timer, so I'm going to move right along and tell you that our next candidate, by name, not by title, Democrat candidate for Missouri Governor, Crystal Quaid. Let's welcome her.
Thanks for joining us, Representative Quaid.
Thank you for having me.
Time starts now.
Okay.
What needs to be done to continue to drive growth in Missouri's top industry, agriculture?
I think the first thing we need to do is be having more conversations, to be honest. I think in my time in Jefferson City, I'm going into my 8th year. What I continue to see is a lot of us telling everybody else what to do, and a lot of we need to be doing more of the listening and actually asking folks what they need. Some of the top issues that I continue to hear from folks about what would help the industry are things that we often aren't connecting, and I think a lot of Missourians don't connect, and some of those would be things like broadband internet access and having conversations about our rural communities and how we get young folks to get to stay there. I hope we can dive into some of those questions about rural schools and hospitals, but I think all of those things are very connected when it comes to how we are increasing the industry.
So where would you say the biggest improvement would be for broadband internet access?
You know, we have a great opportunity in Missouri, and a lot of our states do across the country around those investments. I think it's really key that we are looking at investing wisely, making sure that we are having very good jobs that come along with that broadband installation, and where the kiddos in our families don't have current access. I grew up in Webster County, and where I'm from, kids would have to, during COVID when there was no school, sometimes kids would have to drive 45 minutes to the closest McDonald's to sit in the parking lot and access the internet. And so I think that there's a lot of space for us in that industry to continue to grow it, which helps ag in the long run.
I believe there's some money that was from the Inflation Reduction Act that is, Missouri has some of that money to maybe help with rural broadband. Can you give us an update on where some of the implementation of that may be?
Yeah, I would say I wish it was going faster than it is, to be honest with you, but as most things in government, there's a lot of red tape and a lot of processes before the money is getting out the door. I know that from my understanding, we have a task force that is digging into where we need it first, and then, of course, putting out bids for who we're going to use to install it into which communities. And so it's taking too long, but hopefully we'll see that roll in soon.
You mentioned reinvigorating rural communities. I was reading, of course, the average age of the Missouri farmer, nearly 60 years old, just slightly older than the average age of the U.S. farmer at 57 and a half years old. What should be done to continue to keep a fresh generation of farmers and ranchers involved in the business?
Yeah, I think that is something that folks talk a lot about, the struggles of rural communities. I know when I was in school, folks would leave, and a lot of our kids went to Mizzou and then came back home to run their family farms, and we're just seeing less and less of that. And I think it's a combination. We mentioned broadband. I know that is a huge piece for young people because not only does it something that they want to have, but it also helps grow their personal family farm if they can have access to putting things online and those types of things. But I also think that things are like rural hospitals is a big piece of that conversation. We've had 19 of our rural hospitals in our state close over the past several years, and broadband is, again, something that can help in that space. But when you're a young person and you're talking about where you want to live and raise your family, public education is a topic of conversation. How good are the schools? Are they accessible? All of those things come into mind when you're a young person deciding where you want to live and raise your family.
Of course, I'm sure you're aware Missouri Farm Bureau is in the process of offering health plans to farmers. What's your stance on rural health care affordability and availability?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely one of the most important things to me. All of us have family stories, right? My father had multiple heart surgeries, and it takes him 2 hours to get to the hospital for his checkups, and that is a huge problem. They actually come to Springfield and stay the night with me to access a doctor. And so we have so much work to do as the government around making this a huge priority. One of the things from the Office of the Governor that is extremely important is making sure that we're reimbursing our hospitals timely, and I know that that is a huge struggle for a lot of our hospitals to keep the doors open for those small communities. And so that is a space where, as governor, I can work on that and make sure that those times are faster. We're looking at those rates and making sure that our hospitals aren't going under. We need to have conversations about incentivizing doctors and nurses to come to those communities. And there's a lot of other states that are doing a lot around that, and Missouri is just really falling behind. There are a lot of different spaces that we as the state government can look at to bringing those hospitals back to a vibrant state.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and get to some more of the agriculture-focused issues. I know that I follow a lot in policy world. Here in the state, who has the right to decide whether larger-scale poultry livestock production facilities are allowed to be built across the state?
Well, I think what we need to be doing is making it much more of a local conversation than it is. In my time in the legislature, there has been lots of discussion around these factory farms and who's regulating them, whether that's the local elected authorities and the health departments, or if we're doing that on a state level. And I personally am a believer that local communities should get to decide where those large factory farms are and who is participating, who is buying that farmland. I have filed the foreign agriculture bill, which I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion about today. I have filed that bill, and in my time in the legislature, since I've been there, we've had actually a Democrat filing that every year that I've been there trying to bring control back to the local folks who know what's best for their communities and what they need and what will help them thrive.
You talk about having a more community approach when talking about the larger scale livestock operations. What would you change now, later versus how the approach is taken currently with, deciding what works and what doesn't in every community?
Yeah, the thing that I get contacted the most about, and I'll be clear, I don't live in a rural community anymore. I grew up in one, but I lived in the city of Springfield now, and so it's very important to me that I listen to the folks that are impacted by these things when we're making our decisions. And what I get contacted the most about is actually around water regulation and where these farms are in regards to the drinking water. I grew up on well water. I understand how that is impacted by what's around you, and that is the space that I get talked about the most. And so I would like to see that brought back to the local decision makers.
Shifting gears a little bit here, you talk about water. It makes me think the waters of the United States. It's another ag regulation that continues to affect many farmers and ranchers here in the state and, of course, across the country. What's your take on EPA's latest on the waters of the United States rule?
Yeah, I spent my first job after college actually working for the United States Senate, so I will be the first to say that there is way too much red tape and we need to be doing better, period, and I think that is a completely nonpartisan issue, and I think the conversations around the EPA fall into that too. Again, I would like to see decision makers locally, whether that's state government, of course local folks at the table for these discussions. One of the things I know folks are really striving for is to try to have more community listening sessions with the EPA before these decisions are made, and trying to bring the local communities, and oftentimes those can get a little rowdy, but I think that's okay because we need to be telling the folks in DC what's best for us and not the other way around.
When you talk about water issues, what kind of water issues does your community in Springfield bring to your attention, and do any of them involve agriculture?
Yeah, so what the city of Springfield actually contacts me the most about is our drainage systems. So Springfield is a relatively old city, and we have not invested well in redoing our piping and underground systems, and so we have a lot of flooding that happens whenever we get rain, and it doesn't have to be a lot of rain, and it's pretty quick. And of course the city is different than where we are in rural communities, but those types of infrastructure investments need to be being made across the whole state, and that's not an urban or rural problem. That is a problem that we just haven't been addressing in our state very well.
Thank you. What's your opinion of eminent domain for the construction of new energy and other projects?
Yeah, this is a question that I know not everyone in this room is going to agree with me on. It's been a huge fight in Jefferson City for a very, very long time. My personal opinion is that when we're talking about eminent domain, it should not be used frequently. And when it is used, it should be for what we consider the greater good. And specifically when we're talking about utilities, and I know that's the big controversy that we've had in Missouri over the past few years, it really is a conversation of who is this impacting for the good and who is not. And if we are utilizing eminent domain, absolutely we need to be compensating in a very fair way. But when it comes to the bills that I've seen in Jefferson City, this is a space where I am not the expert in. I'm a social worker by background, and I think the most important thing about any government official is understanding where they are good and where they need some assistance in, and being open to say, I'm not sure about this one. And so when it came to those bills that I've seen come forward in Jefferson City, I talk to the farmers who are elected in the room. I look at the bill sponsors. I say, who is moving this legislation, and try to have as many conversations as I can before we make those hard decisions.
I know we're talking, your election for governor here, but you are also in the state legislature. What do you see as being the top agriculture issue in the next session, at least for your side of the chamber here?
Yeah, so I definitely think the foreign ownership conversation is going to continue to be a large one. I know all y'all in this room know that several years ago, before I was a lawmaker, we had reversed our rules in Missouri, and now there is a big conversation around, should we allow these foreign entities like China to own our farmland, and how much, and are we regulating that? Should we pay attention? I know where I'm from, I have a lot of multi-generation farmers who lived right next door to me and wanted their grandkids to be on the same land, farming that land, and I think it's important that as a state government we really are looking at who controls access to our food. COVID was a great example where I know, and where I'm from, our grocery store aisles were completely empty, and when folks were calling and scared, they were saying, who is controlling this? They want access to their local farm food. They want to be able to call their neighbor and say, hey, let me buy this from you. And when we allow foreign entities to continue to be a part of that conversation in such a serious way, their priorities are not the same as Missourians. It's just not. And so that conversation is definitely a bipartisan discussion that's happening right now. And so I think that will continue to probably be the biggest thing that folks talk about.
We're nearing the end of our time together, and keeping that in mind, what would be your final thought that you'd like to leave with our audience today?
Yeah, what I hope to leave with y'all, first, I realize that I am the first Democrat to sit on this stage in a very, very long time, and I appreciate y'all welcoming me to be here. What I want to say to you guys, and quite honestly, the reason I jumped into this race is I know that Missourians are tired of what's going on, and they're tired of the partisan fighting, and folks want somebody who represents them, who understands their life, and who understands what Missourians are struggling with. I'm the first in my family to graduate high school. My mom's still a waitress today. I come from a background that I think is really important to our discussions, but I think what I would like to leave with you all is that it's not as divisive as everyone wants us to think it is. I've gone through y'all's website, your policies discussions, your folks who come to Jefferson City and I talk all the time. We agree on a lot more than we disagree on, and I'm really running for governor to try to bring us back to that state of Missouri where we can be proud and not be angry with each other all the time and actually try to get some stuff done. So I really appreciate you guys welcoming me and inviting me to the stage.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Crystal Quaid. Our next guest this afternoon, again introducing by name, not title, Mike Kehoe, a Republican candidate for Missouri governor.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Time is starting now.
You bet.
So let's start just with the basics here. What could be done to better improve Missouri's top industry, agriculture?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Pleasure to work with so many people in this room over the last several years, both in the Senate and as my role Lieutenant Governor. I was honored to be picked by Governor Parson to be the chairman of the Missouri Food, Forest Products, and Beverages Task Force, which was an initiative actually started by Farm Bureau and many of the stakeholder groups that we work with around the state, cattlemen, soybean, corn growers, et cetera, to say what is our ag industry right now and what is our room for growth. And what we determined, again, through the help of many people in this room, is that, as you know, we have about a $93 billion industry, that there's about $25 billion worth of room for growth. So how do we get there? How do we get there is through value added. And many of you guys are very much familiar with a great example that we have so far in Warren County with the American Food Groups piece. That's value added. If we're going to get more production out of Missouri, we're not going to annex Kansas or, God forbid, Illinois. We have to get the production within the square footage and the acreage that we have, right? So value added means bringing a processing plant to Missouri for the first time ever in large volume that will, for once, as a cattle producer myself, allow us to not only encourage people to fatten cattle, but have a place to go with them. That's a great example of value added. We have multiple examples that we're working on, whether it's industrial hemp, whether it's agritourism, all of the things that you can do with your family farms that will get more production out of what you have right now and increase that extra $25 billion that we feel is available to us.
In the last year, as you're well aware, we've seen two major food production companies close their processing plants or shut down farms in the state, Smithfield and Tyson Foods. How would Missouri continue to keep and attract new agricultural companies into the state?
We have to be in a position where when these companies make these decisions, sometimes we don't even get a say at the table. And when the decisions were made in McDonald County and Stoddard County, we as the state were not even allowed to come. That was a corporate decision that they made based on the age of those two plants. And unfortunately, we saw that downsizing happen. But what we can do, both as communities that are sitting in this room, and many of you have been a part of these conversations, and going forward, is find out, A, how do we backfill those jobs and get those folks something that they can do in those communities? Because let me tell you something, McDonald County, there's not a whole bunch of openings today for those folks. What can we do to put in those plants? And what can we make sure that we understand about the way our tax structure is based, what our ag economy readiness is for companies that want to come in here, that want to build those plants back up. And I think that we're in a perfect position to be able to do that as we embark on these initiatives like we talked about with different task forces that people in this room are part of, on welcoming those companies here, finding out what it is they need, providing them a skilled workforce, and the framework for them to be successful here.
Is that how you propose getting Missouri to the table for some of those more difficult discussions, as you referenced with Tyson Foods and Smithfield, that, you know, the state really wasn't there to have a presence in that discussion?
We weren't there not because we didn't want to be. We weren't invited. Sometimes corporate decisions are made at a level that just doesn't bring politics into it. And that's just how companies work, and many people in this room understand how that's done. So you have to be there to be ready for the ones that you get to be a part of the table at. And I think when we get to be a part of the table, you can ask the American Food Group's people again. When we were finalizing that deal, their managers told Chris Chin and I that they looked at 4 other places, and Missouri was the best place where the county worked together, the state worked together, all the pieces of the puzzle, the utility company worked together, the co-op worked together, everybody worked together to bring them there, and that's one of the reasons they chose us. So when we have the seat at the table, we have the right tools to put forward.
As I'm sure you're well aware, Missouri remains in a drought. We've been in a drought for a very long time. What are you going to do to help Missouri farms be well prepared to weather through continued drought and future flooding?
Well, as I say to farmers all the time, is that, you know, we can't predict Mother Nature. Claudia and I run a 700-acre beef production cattle ranch in Phelps and Pulaski County. And for you flatlanders in here, when people say, what do you grow? We say we grow rocks. And this year, it was even worse. We had 2 different droughts last year for us, at least in our section, and this year we were in the dark brown piece of the donut hole. So we had no hay production in June, 0. And thank goodness we had some rain at the end of July and August, and we got a nice September hay crop out of it. But when we have these drought problems, you're growing things that feed and clothe the world. This is not like we're giving corporate welfare to somebody. You're actually making a difference in people's lives. And so we have to work together to make sure you have the resources, whether it's through, as we've done in some of the other drought emergencies, whether it's through wells, whether it's through different ideas that we can put together to give you resources for your farm so that you can keep those things going. Because when we take land out of production, when we sell those cattle herds, and you all know if you're in the beef industry, lots are short or current. We're not going to be able to replace those overnight. That same farm is also on the Gasconade River, so we've been subject to 32 feet of water on top of a hayfield, so we understand what it's like when you go through these floods. But the ability to react is what farmers are best at. We're resilient. You all are resilient. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next month, or next year, but somehow you keep going on, and it's the resiliency in the people of this room that really make a difference. Government can't fix all your problems. I got news for you. And government shouldn't be telling you what to do, ever. But together, we can solve these problems, and your tenacity to continue to be the leader in agriculture in the United States, I think, is one of the key solutions.
Who has the right to decide whether larger scale poultry livestock production facilities are allowed to be built in the state of Missouri?
Well, I think it's a local control decision at the point. As you know, Senator Bernschatter's bill, with the help of many people in this room, provided the framework for counties to be able to allow large-scale operations within their counties. And so between what the producer wants to do, what the counties are willing to do, usually we can figure out those solutions. There's always going to be somebody who moves in and says, hey, I don't like this is not the right thing, this is what we're not doing wrong. But if we let common sense prevail just a little bit, usually you can work through those.
I've been reading that the average age of the Missouri farmer is about 60 years old, and I know there have been efforts underway, especially in the last legislative session, to continue to incentivize that next generation of agriculture, ways to help them enter into the industry. If elected as governor, what's your plan to help make it a little easier for that next generation of agriculture to enter into the business?
Well, it's got to be our #1 issue. Because we're leading the state. The United States, the average is 59 years old, and as you mentioned, it's 60 years old.
Well,
here in Missouri.
Missouri's a little bit higher than the national average.
Missouri is higher. That's my point. It has to be the #1 issue, and continuing to work with youth. There's 4-H and FFA kids that are here, that are part of your lives and in your communities. Making sure they understand what the opportunities are in agriculture is how you bring them in. For the first year ever, I didn't get out the 30-foot boom sprayer this year. I had a drone spray my hay crop after I had a little bit of rain first. And it was a 25-year-old operator from West Plains, Missouri, who decided this was the technology he was going to get involved in. He worked with University of Missouri and with MFA in drone science, and he came and provided that technology. The technology that's available to young people now is unbelievable. Farming can be about working the head chute or being out planting corn, but it also can be about how we farm smarter and how we use technology. If we're going to get young people into it, we have to provide the technology that they're most familiar with and comforting with. And then the second thing is capital. Access to capital is incredibly difficult for young people right now. So we've had various ideas and programs through the help of the people in this room where we could provide, along with our partners at the feds, where we could provide some low interest loan rates, where we could provide some easier solutions in our state statute, both with our, and also with our federal partners, where we can provide for your next generation farmers to be able to acquire those assets without you getting your brains taxed out, and with them being able to actually get into the family business.
What's your stance on eminent domain and its use for any energy projects or agricultural projects?
Well, you don't, what nobody wants, everybody wants to be able to have the right to say what they're going to do with their farmland, but the next thing, they're not sure they want a walking trail going through it so that in the middle of deer season, somebody's right in their backyard and all of a sudden they're going to get sued over it, or they're all of a sudden going to put a solar farm right next to your place. Counties have been really good at coming to us in the legislature and saying, how do we do something that accomplishes both goals? Because it's a fine line. Because you could eventually have cooperatives wanting to be investors in some of these solar farms. You could have tourism groups saying that, hey, converting that railroad track into a bike trail is incredible for our economy. We have to be able to balance that to where somebody says, I'm a third, fourth, fifth, or sixth generation farmer. This is not what my ancestors signed up for. Understanding those rights and then being able to have some local control over the second piece of that so that we don't have neighboring farms all of a sudden putting up massive solar pants or some kind of utility distribution center without the people that are involved in that having a say in that decision.
Just out of my curiosity, has there been anything in your current position that you would love to do for agriculture but haven't been able to do in the Parson administration that maybe you will take in this approach as you run for governor?
Yeah, well, we touched on it earlier. I think our number one concern should be how do we get younger people into it? And Governor Parson, in my opinion, has done a great job. As you all know, he's a third-generation farmer and very much involved in what the ag community and ag industry does for our state. But when given the chance, and I would love to have that chance to be your person in the office promoting agriculture, getting young people involved, giving a pathway for them to be able to acquire the capital to start a farm, being able to get them involved in technology. This is not optional. This is not something we can just think about anymore. We have to get that done if Missouri's future as an ag leader will continue.
Real quick, we're watching on the federal level, of course, the Farm Bill, and we haven't seen much progress on that Farm Bill. We're hoping to see maybe some action from federal lawmakers. You know, if elected as governor and we still don't have a Farm Bill, what will be your approach?
Well, I will tell you that, as many of you know, and several people in this room, as I look around, participated when Congressman Alford brought the U.S. Ag Committee, Congressional Ag Committee, to the State Fair. First time that's ever happened for the state of Missouri, and just average old folks who were in the audience, if you were there, just got to walk up and ask a question about what the next farm bill will look like. The chairman out of Pennsylvania was incredibly receptive. I think we have the right people on that committee, and I'm glad Congressman Alford, by the way, is on that committee to be able to craft that farm bill out, because they always put something in it that the opposite party doesn't want, and as you know, SNAP benefits are in those farm bills. I will tell you very quickly, I had Congressman Jackson on my golf cart as we went around the state fair, and about an hour into it, after we passed many kids with blue coats, he said, can you tell me what FFA is? And he's on the Ag Committee. And so, I mean, the guy was good-hearted. He wanted to be there. He wanted to learn what agriculture was about. But that just gives you some sense of what happens at the federal level, is that what you and I take for granted, there's people who don't understand that. So having people like Mark Alford that we can continue to work with, and then governors who will get together their congressional delegation and tell them what this means for our state is incredible. And last but not least, member organizations such as yourself. This is the most respected organization in the state. Not because I'm here, not because I've been a 27-year member. I'm just telling you who the halls walk and who listens to. Having Farm Bureau on your side and any ag group that you're a part of is a key to moving those farm bills forward.
Thank you for your time. We're nearing the very end of our time together. And quickly, what would be your parting message with our audience today?
Well, as I just mentioned, Claudia and I have been 27-year member of Farm Bureau. We are active cow-calf producer, but this is my 39th year. The ag community has taught us so much about life, about raising a family, and just about what is common sense, right and wrong. I believe that with my background of growing up in a very urban area where we didn't even have grass to play on, we played in a cemetery to find grass where I grew up. Going from that environment to a very rural environment, going from a very humble beginning with a single parent and no father in my life to having some success with the help of a lot of people, many in this room, through many business ventures, I think I have the unique perspective to do what it takes to lead the state of Missouri. And I'd love to be the #1 spokesperson for our #1 industry that you're all a part of. Our family farms are the most important thing that we have here. We are #2 in the United States with 95,000 family farms. I would love to be able to continue to be your spokesperson and your advocate to make sure folks from rural and urban understand how important agriculture is, what it means to our state, and what we need to do to make sure we keep it going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Kehoe. Our fourth and final candidate, again introducing by name, not title, Jay Ashcroft, Republican candidate for Missouri Governor.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Time starts now.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm not used to actually needing to use a microphone. My wife would tell you I have a big enough voice, but thank you.
I think they can hear us all the way in the back, which is always good. We're going to start off with just a really basic question here. What would be your top recommendation for the state of Missouri's agriculture industry to continue to drive economic growth in this sector?
The biggest thing we need to do, Missourians know how to produce livestock, they know how to grow crops. We need to open markets. So we need to open more markets, and we need to do more, not just with our infrastructure and roads and bridges, especially our lettered roads, but we also need to concentrate on our inland waterways. We have the great opportunity to have a major inland waterway port just south of St. Louis, bring containerized cargo, either importing it to Missouri all the way up from the Gulf Coast, drop it onto a different ship that'll take it up to Kansas City on the Missouri, or to take our exports. Everything we can move on water that you have to purchase, that's a direct help to your bottom line because it's cheaper, and everything you want to sell that we can export on water, that just increases what you get in return for it because your cost of logistics and transporting it is smaller. Great example, have a friend that does logging. He can log trees in southwest Missouri. The cost for him to get it from southwest Missouri to the Gulf, because of how we do it here in Missouri, is the same as the cost when they log trees in Georgia and take them to China because they can use the waterways. We have got to make the improvements in our inland waterways so that Missouri's agriculture can compete worldwide.
You talk about building markets. Is that only through infrastructure, or what other solutions are there to continue to build markets for Missouri agriculture products?
There's a lot of ways we can do it, but regardless of whether we keep the markets we have or increase other markets, anytime we can decrease your cost of goods that you're selling, that inures to your bottom line or the things that are coming in. But also, we need to be aggressive working with our federal partners. I mean, Congressman Jason Smith tells a story. I think it was the president of Taiwan was at a meeting where he was, and he had the opportunity to ask why he was hearing bad things about American pork in Taiwan. 3 weeks later, someone from that president's office sends him pictures of posters that the government of Taiwan was putting out that, I don't speak Chinese, you'll have to take my word for it, but according to their translation said, American pork is safe and should be eaten. We need to be pushing for that sort of thing. We need to press for reciprocity so that other countries are treating us at least as well as we treat them.
How do you propose addressing issues with inland waterways when we've had really a big drought, and that seems to be the big pressing issue in regards to moving product, at least to the Gulf of Mexico?
We've definitely had big droughts. Some people on kind of the south side, like our family farms in Greene County, we've had droughts this year and last year. Some of you up north got a little luckier and just had it this year. I'm not saying anything, but I'm jealous. But one of the things, we've finished the surveys of the upper and lower Mississippi. We need to start working with other states for how we're going to deal with the Mississippi to make sure that that is navigable, to make sure that we're taking care of where that water can go. A lot of times government is fighting the last battle. So we're saying this is what happened 5 years ago, this is what happened 10 years ago, let's prepare for this. But the environment's changing. People are building bigger levees. People are taking away processes for the water to go into the soil instead of running to the rivers. And you've got to plan for that. There's a lot of opportunity to deal with locks in the upper Mississippi, to put money into that so that we can have the ability to be going downriver and upriver at the same time by doubling those up. We have got to use those inland waterways. And I think as we repurpose those, it also creates more importance in everybody's favorite agency, which would be the Army Corps of Engineers, I'm sure, that we have to use that for logistics, for agricultural, and not just, for snail darters and other fish nobody's ever seen.
Another agency farmers and ranchers seem to love is the Environmental Protection Agency.
For about 4 years, they were doing better.
So we are monitoring, of course, what's happening with federal regulations, a lot happening with the EPA, including Waters of the United States. It just seems like there is continuous litigation surrounding WOTUS. What is your stance on the EPA's current definition of the Waters of the United States rule?
It's wrong. It's an overreach. It's a federal grab of other people's properties. It's a taking under the United States Constitution. For about 4 years, I got to take my little button that was the EPA with the red slash over it, and I put it away under Donald J. Trump. Under Joe Biden, unfortunately, I've had to get it back out. They don't care about the people. This is the government enforcing their will on the people instead of the people enforcing their will on the government. That's why you need strong leaders. That's why you need strong governors. Unfortunately, if you go to the U.S. Senate, we've got great U.S. senators, but they're not getting anything done there. What we've seen over the last 4 or 6 years is that the right leadership at the state level can take state issues, make them national issues, and can get change. Look at what happened when we had state leadership that was willing to work with our federal leadership, and we brought some parts of the Department of Agriculture to Kansas City. We can do it. It's not easy, but you need people that are going to do the hard work and not going to take no for an answer.
Let's talk a little bit about private property rights. What's your stance on eminent domain for the use of agricultural products or even energy projects?
Well, I don't think you ought to look at eminent domain versus agricultural products or versus energy. I think you ought to go back to the foundation that when you buy that land is yours. I've consistently said that we have problems with eminent domain abuse. I've been concerned about some things that the federal government wanted to do with scenic waterways and scenic riverways earlier. I've been very vocal at the Capitol and other places with problems I had with the eminent domain being used for the power lines going across our state to help other people. I don't think that's right. If you have an economic need and it makes sense for you to want to run power lines, then you have to go to the farmer and ask them if they're willing to sell. It's their property. That's not a road that we have to have. That's their property. They paid for it. If you're not willing to pay the fair market value, which is what the owner wants for it, it shouldn't be yours.
What's your stance on foreign ag land ownership, specifically when we're looking at opportunities to address the issue without affecting agricultural research?
Well, I worked on the 2 main pieces of legislation that were in the legislature this year. We had a bill, HB 903, that I worked on with Representative Hafner, who I think is here. Shout out to him. I saw him earlier. That would have actually made sure that we protected the ability to do agriculture, but also, food security is national security. We've seen problems with countries like China building up land around military installations and otherwise. We need to take a stand against that. So we had a bill that would do that, passed by the House. Unfortunately, the Senate, they did the Senate stuff to it. I'll just leave it at that.
What do you think of the approach we've seen from other states that have managed to pass, updated or brand new legislation in regards to foreign ag land ownership? For example, we've seen Arkansas implement some very powerful legislation.
Well, I would point to Florida. If you look at Florida's bill, that was modeled on HB 903 that Representative Hafner and I wrote. It was actually introduced after our bill had been debated, and I don't think quite after we had passed it out of the House. But because they had a governor that was willing to lead on the issue and use political capital, they got it done. In Arkansas with Governor Huckabee, she's been willing to stand up and say, this is what we need to do. Look, we need leadership. We need a state that's going to be elevating opportunity for the people of the state and not just kind of floating along in a stream to see what happens.
You mentioned rural infrastructure a little bit in the beginning. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how, if elected governor, you would address the needs of rural roads and bridge improvements?
You know, one of the big things that we need to do is, and this will make some people happy, some people unhappy, the gas tax hasn't been enough for our roads for my lifetime. And one of the problems is the courts in Missouri just held, maybe it's 3 months ago now, I'm sorry, I get tired as I visit every county in the state. They just held that when transportation wants to decide where they're going to spend money on roads or how they're going to spend it, they don't have to go through the legislature. That money isn't even appropriated by the legislature. I see Senator Crawford here, who's been a big help to me on some things. If she has constituents that say, we need this lettered road dealt with, this bridge needs to be reworked, it's been taken from 2 lanes down to 1 lane, she no longer controls the budget for them because they can just tell OA, this is how much money we want to have and it has to be given. That's what the courts have said. We need to go back to a process where A, infrastructure with regard either urban or rural is a priority in this state, therefore we should allocate general revenue to it because general revenue should go to the most important things that we have. That's why we have it. And secondly, if we use general revenue, then your state representative and your state senator will be able to vote on that appropriation and on that budget. And if an agency, in this case transportation, isn't using that money appropriately and making sure that it doesn't all go to I-70, but it also goes to some of us, and in the 80 or 90 rural counties in the state of Missouri, the only way to do that is to change how we allocate those funds.
What's your stance to ensure that there's transparency in animal husbandry practices and I guess, agriculture has the right to farm?
Well, I think that everything government does should be about transparency because the worst thing you can have in government is a lack of accountability. Government should always be accountable to the people, and you cannot have true accountability without transparency, and when government gets too large, it makes it even more difficult to have transparency. To do something that's slightly analogous, I've been the Secretary of State, I've been in charge of elections, the Chief Election Authority for the state. I've made it my mission to make how we run our elections as transparent as possible, except for how an individual votes, because I believe that I should be accountable to the people of this state. The only way I can be accountable is if they truly know what's going on, and that's how we can use their wisdom and knowledge to move the state forward in the right direction.
Who has the right to decide whether larger scale poultry, livestock production facilities are allowed to be built in this state?
Look, I generally believe that if it's your property, you get to decide how you use it. I mean, I guess I wouldn't necessarily want a radioactive waste pit right next to me, but generally speaking, you paid for the property, you bought it, it's your property. Otherwise, we don't really believe in private property, and how can you have a free society if you don't really own it?
Thank you. We are nearing our time end together here today. Well, we do have one final question for you. What would be your parting message to the audience today? What would be the one key takeaway that you want them to walk away with?
I guess what I would point out is look at my record. Look at what I've done as Secretary of State, what I said I would do, and what I've accomplished. I'm an engineer. I think one of the problems we have in society is that we have politicians that are good at really fixing the blame. I think we need engineers that will fix the problem. Look at what I've done when it comes to elections. Look at what I've done with securities, what I've done with regard to our libraries. Look at what I've done in all different areas. And I hope that you will vote for me August 6th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.